Hey, Bill, how are you doing?
Mike, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. It's great to have you. It's great to see you. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So, before we hit record, I was saying that I watched a little bit of your most recent TEDx talk in Reno, and I couldn't help but be impressed by the way you opened the talk, which was talking about a personal experience you had as an athlete and your relationship or the experience you had with coaches at the time. Could you maybe just start out by sort of recounting that story, because I think it's a good framework for this conversation.
Oh boy. It can bring up, I might get shivers here thinking about it. It it's funny, Mike, nobody's ever asked me about this. And to start that TEDx talk with this story, um, it's the first time I've ever really opened up about this. But my dream as a kid was to be Bart Starr, Green Bay Packers quarterback. It kind of tells you how old I am, if anybody knows that name. Um, but I had a lot of amazing experiences as starting quarterback. That was just what I did. I just expected. And anyway, if I got to a program a year, which back then would have, I suppose, been able to select football. It was,
Mhm.
tryout teams. And I had a shoulder injury that summer. And I was afraid to tell anybody about that injury. Number one, I didn't want it to prevent me from playing quarterback. B, if I was raised in an environment where if you're hurt, you just sucked it up and played. Long short of it was, it prevented me from throwing the ball like more than 10 yards. Looking back, I'm sure I had a rotator cuff tear. But
Yeah.
anyway, what happened was the coaches never even asked. They didn't inquire. They didn't care. If all they could see, and I mentioned this in talk, all they could see was a quarterback who could not bring them victories. It's all they wanted, was to win, win, win. I understand the desire to win. I love to win too. Um, but in doing so, emotionally, they just tore me apart. If they called me an embarrassment, told me I wasn't going to be, I wasn't even invited to play offense anymore. Uh, had me leave practice. And none of this was for lack of effort. It was just for lack
Yeah.
of the ability to execute. And it was probably one of the greatest also motivators I had in my life, especially to start the businesses that I now
Hmm.
have started and am CEO of. One of the most recent being the sports division of what we do.
Yeah. It's I certainly can relate to the story that you told and that you just sort of recounted on a number of levels. Because if I think back to my own playing days as a football player, I had a number of injuries that I never reported to coaches because I was afraid that I would either not play or I would be considered, letting the team down. So I just did it, right? So that's the one thing. But on a professional level, right, there's this just fundamental um, concept of the coach athlete relationship that I consider myself a student of, right? I'm curious about that relationship specifically, and maybe not dissimilar from any other relationships, right? In our lives, relationships are based on trust, but coach athlete is certainly one that's unique in a lot of ways. So, like, can you talk about like what you do to study that at the Ecsell Institute?
Sure. And thank you for asking that question, Mike. We are really, all we're about on the sports division is understanding that student athlete coach dynamic. We refer to it as the student athlete experience, which
Hmm.
everybody's probably going to be listening to this has heard that term before. And what was really interesting to us is when we were kind of drawn into the world of athletics with our work, and our work forever on the business side, we have quantified a leader's impact on the growth and performance of their teams in the business world. We were asked to bring our work and apply it to the world of sports, as specifically as it relates to coaching and the student athlete dynamic.
Mhm.
So, being a research-based organization, our executive director for research started doing a series of focus groups with athletic directors and coaches and players and students, and then we did one-on-one conversations with professional athletes, and so we did a lot of due diligence. What was interesting to us, Mike, is when we did focus groups with ADs and coaches. Now, this is at the high school level that we did most of these focus groups. Other conversations with professional athletes, but AD focus groups, coaches were at the high school level. And the ADs and coaches both said unequivocally the most important item in their world was to make sure their student athletes had the best possible experience in high school.
Mhm.
Coaches said the same thing. We asked about winning. That's down a ways. They love to win. They get it. They understood it. Coaches ranked it higher. But ADs and coaches both agreed the most important thing to them was making sure their student athletes had the best possible experience. So then the follow-up question that Stacia, our director of research, asked, she said, can you tell me if that is happening? And both focus groups just got dead quiet, Mike. I mean,
Right.
they looked at each other and then looked at us and said, I don't know.
Right.
We hope they are, but we don't know. And
Mhm.
so basically, that she paraphrased. She said, "Let me make sure I understand. The most important thing to you as a coach or an athletic director is to make sure your student athletes have a great experience, but nobody can tell me whether or not that it's happening." And they all agreed, and none of them knew. So
Yeah.
that was our segue. And what we do then is if we survey student athletes, coaches, administrators to get a science-based look and to be able to actually quantify
Mhm.
the experience student athletes have. And
Right.
then we report that back to coaches, ADs, and whoever, to the
Right.
stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, when you were saying that, sort of the light bulb went off for me, which is to say, right, one, you can have an agreement or an understanding that this is the most important thing, but how you measure and define that can vary greatly across a population, right? Like, it's easy to say like, hey, we want the best experience for the student athlete, but what does that mean? We need to be able to set a very clear understanding across all participants, right? Have a consensus about this is what it looks like, this is what we need to do, and this is how we need to measure it to make sure they're getting that. Otherwise, you could all have an agreement, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the results you want.
Yeah, Mike, that's great. That's a great point. When you think about it, it's somewhat silly. It'd be like asking a basketball coach, "Hey, what's the most important role for your point guard?" And they may say assists.
Right.
Oh, great. How many assists do they average? Well, I don't know. No, they would never say that, right?
Right.
Because they study and analyze and know and are able to track what's most important to success in the position. But when it
Hmm.
comes to coaching, the most important thing they said, top down, was the experience. But yet none of them quantified it.
Yeah.
So that was our okay. That's what we're going to do. If that is that important to you, we will learn to quantify that. And so you go through steps like, you have to define what the student athlete experience means.
Hmm.
And so you got to put definitions to things, and then you go about measuring. So
Right. So as I understand it, your audience, constituency, client base is schools, right? Administrators, coaches, et cetera, right? who are making those decisions and sort of, executing that experience for the student athlete. So how would you characterize the receptivity of that audience, excuse me, when you go to sort of speak to them and explain what you do? Like, what do you hear? I mean, I'm sure it varies, but like, what's the sort of general sentiment from those people that you're talking to?
Uh, Another great question, Mike. It's well received, and the reason why, and this is what I love about working in the world of athletics
Mhm.
versus business. Don't get me wrong, love the business side.
Right.
Been doing it for over a decade. Um, but what's amazing about the athletic world is several items. Number one, uh, especially at the high school level, coaches and athletic directors, I'll just be blunt, they're not in it for the money.
Right.
They're in it for the love and the purity in this of sports, of athletics, and more importantly, by and large, again, I'm going to put 90 some percentile. They care most about the kids.
Mhm.
They really do.
Yeah.
And so when we have conversations around the student athlete experience, never do I hear an athletic director or a coach say, nah, no interest. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
They always want to know more about it. Now, whether they do things or not, because here's the rub: to report back to an athletic director, and this, we could open a big can of worms here, uh, how well their coaches are impacting the experience of the student
Mhm.
athletes. There's some onus then, Mike, on the AD to do something about
Something about it. Right.
it,
Exactly. Right.
especially if the impact isn't what it should be, or it's a
Right.
negative impact,
Right.
right?
So it's easier
Now,
to not know than it is to know, because now, right?
right. You nailed it. Sometimes I would just do not know because I know I have problems. Now, rarely do we get when an AD get a report back on a coach where they're like stunned.
Right.
Maybe through parents, through student athletes, through
Mhm.
observation, they pretty much know. Um, but now, when you got a piece of paper that says your coach, let's just say your volleyball coach,
Mhm.
has only 4 out of 10 of their 40% of their student athletes believe they have a trust connection with their coach. Now, as an AD, I should do something with that.
Sure.
As a coach, I would want to do something with that.
Yeah.
So it sometimes what we like to use the term, Mike. There's a gap between intellectual understanding and emotional readiness to act,
Yep.
and we all have it. It's all that
Sure.
sometimes that gap, or perhaps it's a chasm, depending on the person.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's the change process, right? It's any decision that we make that we want to change something, we have to be motivated enough to go ahead and do something about it. And we may not be ready to do that just yet, but it takes time sometimes to get to the point where you're ready to pull that trigger and say, okay, I need to do something about this.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're a psychologist. My goodness,
Mhm.
you understand how we go through, right. We have a stimulus, and then we have an emotional response to it, and the response creates a behavior, and the behavior creates something, right?
Yep.
An action,
Yeah.
and it is so. Every AD says it's important and agrees. Now, there are a few out there, and I don't know if you ran into them, where they're perhaps more old school and they don't want the student athlete to have a voice.
Okay. So no, but that's where I was going to go next, because I don't know if I have any specific examples, but that concept, right? Like, I'm thinking about what you do first, which is to say, I would imagine at some level, if you start to work with a school, there's going to be a survey process with the student athlete. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. So if I'm an athletic director or a coach, just by virtue of giving a kid a survey to give their opinion, you've already started to build that bridge because you're giving them a say, right? Even
Mhm.
if it's just perceived, even if they take that survey and they throw it in the garbage, the kid says at least, hey, I'm able to just, give my opinion. Because what I experience in the work that I do is when I work with a kid, even at the high school or college level, where they're pretty mature, relatively speaking, and I ask them to give me feedback, or I say to them, "Hey, this is your process. Like, ask me questions, like, or tell me I need to do something different, or if you're not getting what you need, let me know." That is a very uncomfortable place for a student athlete because my sense is they rarely ever get that from their coaches, right?
Mhm.
It's I'm the coach, you're the athlete. I tell you what to do and you do it. Or there's the perception that I can't go to the coach because I don't want to be perceived a certain way as the athlete. So I keep quiet, sort of like what you were saying about your injury, right? I'm going to keep it to myself because I don't want my coach to think something's wrong with me. So I'm just going to, right, not say anything. And I think that dynamic, that ability to communicate and to give the student athlete a voice is so critical in the athletic experience because to use a term that I think I get the sense that's really important to you in your work is psychological safety, right? To have that psychological safety to go to that person who's supposed to be caring for you and be able to tell them what you need and not feel like you're going to be punished for
Mhm. Yes, yes, it is. And I mean, there's so many
it.
examples, so many places we could go with this, but
Yeah.
to give someone a voice in their own development,
Yeah.
to give someone a voice in how they want to be treated, um, to give someone a voice to let them know that perhaps I don't like the way I'm being treated.
Mhm.
Now, let me preface this all by saying, while we measure psychological safety, we measure trust connections,
Mhm.
we also measure challenge because we're big believers in coaches' ability to create healthy discomfort as well,
Sure.
because growth only occurs in in those environments. But you'll notice how I put the term with the word healthy in front of discomfort,
Right.
because you can, as my coach, Mike, you can create discomfort for me through fear. Now, take you back to my previous coaches, right? Fear-based coaching. I can be uncomfortable and I can grow as a result, but it doesn't mean I'm going to have a great experience
Mhm.
as well. So we're not believers in this big group hug, kumbaya, love
Right.
fest that doesn't create tension.
Mhm.
We're believers in trust. We're believers in psych safety. We're believers in connections as the foundation from which then you will have earned the right as a coach to push, to challenge, to make me uncomfortable, to help me grow.
Yep.
And it's quite frankly, it's got to go in that order as well too. So by giving me a voice, I'm telling you, I'm helping you as a coach, I'm helping an athletic director as an administrator understand where I'm at in that journey and where the coach is at in that journey.
Mhm.
Together, we can create some amazing growth and development in coaches
Mhm.
that wasn't there before. Because while student athletes, I mean, think about this. I mean, boy, I can get on a roll right now. I've done work at the collegiate level with athletes, and say a gymnast can, during a workout, get off of a routine, an apparatus, right?
Mhm.
And immediately watch it and get graded immediately, right?
Right.
On how well she did.
Mhm.
And can then turn around and go back and with coach feedback as well as just video feedback, I know what I can do to improve. How does a coach do that? How does a coach know? What are those things we're giving to coaches that allow them the same
Mhm.
opportunity to grow that they expect from their student athletes every single day?
Mhm.
That's really what we need.
That's really interesting. Because, not at the level you're doing at it, but there, you know, I have, again, I'm just generally a curious person, but in my professional world, I'm very curious about coach education, right? Because in the United States, just take as an example, right? We don't have any really national centralized bodies for coaching or federations, right? Maybe soccer, but that's about it, or USA hockey, but there's very few, right? It's very decentralized. And what ends up happening is that the standards are different all over the place, right? And so, like, coaches don't have to get education. They just show up and go to their job. They don't have to do professional development if they don't want to in a lot of cases, or maybe they're getting the wrong kind of coaching. Maybe they need a psychological and emotional coaching versus tactical and technical, right? There's a deficiency there, right? Like, they need to get better too, so they can be better for the people that they're serving. I think that that's really important. So I mean, I guess, I mean, now I'm really curious about the work that you do. I mean, in terms of that, is it just giving those organizations, the schools, the administrators, the information, or do you do some sort of programming on the back end of that?
We do my programming on the back end. If it wouldn't be, I wouldn't feel good about, hey, here's what you do well. You're a great communicator. You're great at
Mm-hmm.
challenging. You're good at developing their skills. But you're creating poor psychological safety, and your connection with your student athletes is average at best. That, have fun, go at it, go get them,
Right.
Tiger.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so we have created an online learning portal through a learning management system that has everything from kind of a community aspect to it, so they can communicate with other coaches across the country, as well as formalized training. Like, how do I
Mhm.
create greater psychological safety
Right.
within my team? What is it that I can do as a coach to improve my connection with my athletes? And
Mhm.
in psych safety, so when we look at relationship, for example, um, the relationship between coach and student athlete, we break that down into two pieces: psych safety and trust based connections.
Mhm.
Those typically, not typically, I would say across the board, and we've measured now probably over 500,000 interactions between coaches and student athletes. Those two, Mike, psych safety and trust connections, are the lowest scores that coaches get.
Yeah.
One's in the 60 some percentile, the other's in the 71st percentile. Um, and that's always, those two are always the one where catches a coach off guard.
Yeah.
They think, oh yeah, I love my athletes, and they do. They care
Right.
about them deeply, but they just don't. The athletes don't know it.
Right. So what I find fascinating about that, or was really interesting to me because of the work that I do. See, I coach it from the other side, which is to say, hey, young person, yes, your coach is the grown up. Yes, you trust them. Yes, you expect them to serve and take care of you as a coach. But, right, you have to understand that there's one coach or three coaches and there's 50 of you, and that coach has another job, potentially has other responsibilities, has a family, blah, blah, blah. There's only so much bandwidth to go around, right? So even if your coach loves you, he may not have the time, the energy, or the information that he needs to serve you. So, athlete, you need to learn empathy for your coach, and you need to take at some level responsibility for yourself. Meaning, if you're not getting what you need, now you need to go ask for it, which
Mhm.
is, I can tell you, is highly uncomfortable for the athlete because it's so unusual. But what I usually hear from my athletes is when I get to a place where I have a student athlete who comes to me, and I've had a couple at the Division I college level, like, come to me, and I'm like, listen, your coach has got a lot going on. I said, what would it be like to go talk to your coach about your issue? I don't know. I don't know. We talk through it. They go to have the conversation, and then they come back, and I say, how did it go? And they say, well, I didn't hear exactly what I wanted to hear, but they universally feel the same thing. What do you think that is?
Mhm.
What do you think
Are
they feel? Yeah. What do you think they feel?
I apologize. So, how does a coach feel about?
How does the student athlete goes to the coach and says, I'm having this issue, or I'm trying to understand why, coach, you're doing what you're doing. Why aren't I playing, or whatever?
Mhm.
And the student athlete comes back to me and says, I didn't hear exactly what I wanted to, but now I know. Like, what's that? What do you think the feeling is that they all say they feel?
Well, it's probably relief, probably hurt,
Exactly.
you know.
Relief. They're all relieved. Right now, I didn't love what the coach said to me, but at least I know exactly where I stand. Right. And that sort of goes back to what you're talking about, right? If the coaches are letting those athletes know where they stand, whether good, bad, or otherwise, it creates that healthy discomfort of like, hey, I love you, but these are the things that you need to do to get better. And I'll help you do that. Now, all of a sudden, you've created this dialogue with the athlete like, hey, like, I see you and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but like, this is what you need to do. And this is how we're going to help you. Right. That's to me, that's the essence of good coaching. And I think that the communication piece is really the thing that gets missed. Right. Communication is typically not very good for whatever reason. So
Uh,
I'll let you pick up there.
no, I loved your story because for a lot of reasons, uh, everybody has ownership in development. Uh, I ask coaches all the time, who owns their development? You know, just generally, and they'll always say, well, we own our own development, right? But you also have to walk away and say, well, that's true, but yeah, I still own the development of my kids too, right?
Sure.
Even though my job in their development is to help them understand they own their development, right? But
Right.
Similarly, if I was working with a D1 female athlete who had mentioned something about, G Bill, you've told me how big relationships are. I've heard you talk about how I have to have a connections with my coach and get to know them. They have to get to know me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the coach had admonished her for something, a series of things, and she was so angry. He doesn't know me. He's not gotten to know me. How dare he come down on me like this, knowing that he should be connecting with me first before he does that. And my response was like yours. I just said, so you understand how important connections are. You darn right, Bill, I do. So you're going to blame him. Now you're a victim. What can you do?
Right.
Make this? How much of this do you own? And that was, I don't think it was the answer she thought she was going to get,
Right.
at the
Right.
time in the moment, but it made her stop in her tracks and say, oh,
Exactly.
okay. So I have onus in this as well. And
Yeah.
so we need, Mike, through your work and through our work, we need to continue
Mm-hmm.
to attack the growth of both sides
Yes.
in a healthy way. We
Yes.
can't be just student athletes. We can't be just coaches. We can't be just administration. Everybody has a responsibility to
Mm-hmm.
get involved and to develop. And I'm sure you believe this too, all growth. And I tell coaches this all the time. You want your team to get better. You want your team to grow. You want your team to evolve. Go home and first look in the mirror. Because how
Yeah.
they respond, you're the biggest trigger in their life. And the response to your triggers, is either creating growth or not creating growth. So you want more growth, go home and look in the mirror and say, how are you going to evolve?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do that first, it also sets the table for your student athletes.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's a really, I love the conversation because I think it's so important. And as you were talking, I'm thinking about like, what does it mean, right? What does it mean for a student athlete to have a good experience? It means really at the end of the day that they continue on in sport because if they're not having a good experience, they're going to quit. Right. And so it's up to not only the coaches, right? And we're not going to really get into the side of it, but it's also the parents are a function of that, right? They create the motivational climate or they help to create it like the coaches do so that the kid wants to continue to grow. They want to get better, right? Like in the TED Talk you were talking about like winning is important because it's important to kids. Kids want to win. They want to get the results back and the feeling of winning back from all the effort that they put in, right? So winning is important to them, right? But growing, getting better is important, right? having a good time is important. All those things factor into the experience and the motivation to continue on. And we all have a responsibility in that, to your point, right? We're all coaches, parents, administrators, the athlete, everyone's got a stake in it. And I think if those things are communicated clearly and properly up front, that maximizes the chances of success on the back end, right? It doesn't guarantee it necessarily because
Right.
life is life, but it maximizes the chances of success. And if we can get to a place where everybody's on the same page in agreement, which I'm imagining your work does, right? If somebody brings you in, if some school brings you in and says, hey, come do this, now all of a sudden, like you said, you kind of open up this dialogue for how do we get better? And now what do we need to do? You're almost sort of like starting from scratch again. Like, let's really like get this to a place where we want it to be, right? Tell me about a success story that you've had. Like, you don't have to name names, but like, can you give me an
Oh,
example?
there have been, we've had so many wonderful, I'm trying to think. I've seen coaches um, make significant changes and really positively impact
Mm-hmm.
the student athletes. And I've seen same coaches tank it.
Hmm.
I've seen coaches that just are at a high level all the time, that they just are so in tune with the kids that they're coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that are written about them, the way the kids respond to them, they're life changing when the kids are writing on this. We give them the opportunity to just, hey, anything else you'd like to share. And
Sure.
when the kids write on there, when I get older, I want to be just like her. If I ever become a coach, I would coach exactly the way he coaches me.
Mm-hmm.
This guy has changed my life. Those are the things that, when you focus on the athlete experience and not winning is an outcome. It's a measuring stick. I said this in the TED Talk. It's
You
not
did.
good. It is what it is. It's an
Right.
outcome, right? It's a goal, and it's healthy to have those things in place. But you can't control the wins. You can control all the prep that
Mm-hmm.
comes up before it. And so if coaches, they tell athletes all the time, I know they do, which is, hey, all we can control is how hard we practice. All we control is our effort, right? All those controllable things, right? Well, what about you, coach? What are you controlling? And if coaches focused on providing the best possible experience, what we see in the business world is that the team that reports to that leader, the people that report to that leader, give the most amount of discretionary effort. We're seeing the same things. We're continuing to do research on this. Same thing in the world of sport. If you provide me, Mike, you're my coach. You know me as a person. You ask about my life outside of the sport. I know you care about me beyond the sport. You challenge me. You love me, but man, you push me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you more effort than I would most coaches. I'm going to give you that,
Yep.
what we refer to as discretionary effort.
Yep.
And so if you want more wins, quit focusing on wins and start focusing on the experience, because you're going to get more from me than you would otherwise.
Yes. And I think you said it in the TED Talk, and this is something, and I'm paraphrasing, and maybe if I get this wrong, you could correct me, but you talk sort of about that idea of discretionary effort. And I think the irony of it is that if you create the environment for the athlete to choose and you put the focus on that, the wins will come. That's my personal opinion. That's not science. That's what I believe, right? If you create the environment for the athlete to thrive and to be happy and to play hard and to love the experience, that's when you get the wins. When you put the focus on the wins, now all of a sudden it becomes this spotlight on the athlete to be perfect, because the only thing that's going to be acceptable is a win. Now I can't screw up, because if I do, I'm a failure, right? And so it's almost like this sort of, this paradox. It's like it's so interesting. And I think coaches do focus on the wins and losses because it's tangible. It's tangible, it's accepted, yada yada yada. But when you do that, like you said in the talk, which I loved, and it's common sense, but it makes it people don't think about it this way, is 99% of coaches end the season with a loss, right? So does that make your season a failure? In my book, it doesn't, right? Did you get better? Did you, maybe
Right.
you lost the last game, or maybe you did the best you could with what you had. Maybe you outperformed your talent, whatever it is. A good coaching job is not solely based on wins and losses. It can't be, because then we'd only have one good coach and hundreds of crappy ones.
Right. Because 98% of their teams lose their last game of the season.
Exactly.
So it's ridiculous to base success
Yes, it is.
solely on that. And you're right. That was part of my talk. Yeah. To convince a coach, which I did, I had the ability to do, to convince a coach to spend less time in the gym working on skills and drills and spend more time away from the gym, creating stronger relationships, working on a healthy mindset, improved team dynamics,
Yeah.
resulted in no parent issues, more wins, school record for wins, right? All those things are in place. When we quit focusing on them, wow, look what can
Right.
happen.
Well, I think you've put your finger on something that I see quite a bit of, which is like in my work, right? Like either when it's been with a team or when it's with an individual, either doesn't matter. But there's this really, what's the right word? There's this reluctance to put aside physical training, skill development, practice, court time, field time, aside for, hey, I'm going to work on the mental stuff. And the way I try to frame it is like, listen, if you're a college athlete, you're spending 20, 30, 40 hours a week on your sport. All I'm asking for you to do is spend 45 minutes with me in a session and spend another 15 to 30 minutes outside of it working on some other stuff. So 1 hour versus 30. Most kids, when I ask them, how much mental work do you do? And you could probably get the same answer from a coach, is how much mental work do you do? Is zero, right? How much time do you spend on your sport, like physically? Gazillion hours. Does that make sense? Right? Like at this
No,
point, you've put in so many hours, and there's automaticity built in, and I think you sort of alluded to that, right? There's this automaticity. You've played so much basketball, soccer, football, hockey, you name it. You know how to do it, right? What's the marginal return of another hour, practicing your dribbling? But what if you put an hour practicing on, working on the team dynamics or your mindset, or, your breathing, or whatever it is that's not specifically related to being on the court? The marginal return on that is through the roof. But like
mm-hmm.
there's so much, I think we live in such a fear-based, like risk-averse world, right? We want to do what we know is tangible and has proven success. When you do something that's maybe a little bit more abstract or different, everybody's like, well, why am I wasting my time? And nobody has the patience or the curiosity a lot of times to try this stuff because they feel like it's not giving me an immediate return, which is a shame.
You're right, Mike, and it's it gets back to the intellectual understanding and emotional readiness.
Yes.
When you walk through the psychology of sport, right, the psychology of performance, the mental
Mhm.
game, there are very few coaches, I think, that would say it's not important. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
I think many would say the closer you get to the actual performance itself, the game, the match, whatever it may be, if I'm a figure skater, whatever, the shift from technical work, skill work to mindset work should begin to shift. And if there's sports psych does work Canadian Olympic team up in Canada. His name's Dr. Peter Jensen. I'm paraphrasing this, but it was
Yeah.
in his book, and he shared this with me. He's a wonderful man. But as they get like a week out, coaches are thinking is probably you know um, how was it 3 hours, 3 days, 30 days, that 3 hours out from the competition. They believe it's probably 90-10. Coaches say 90% at that point mental, 10% physical. But
Mhm.
yet when asked to analyze the conversations with their athletes as a coach, it's 90% technical and physical and only 10% mental. You
Yeah.
know, it, they have a hard time making the shift. So intellectually they get it,
Yep.
but it's what they know. It's what they grew up with.
Yeah.
You and I didn't grow up with sports psych.
Nope. Nope. And I think, to some of it, to not to, and I'm not going to go down this road, but I think the word that comes to mind when you describe that is control, right? It's a lot easier to control the physical, right? If I'm in a stressful situation where I'm about to go out and compete in the competition of my life, I want a sense of control because my emotions are probably all over the place. My thoughts are all over the place. But if I can control what's going on around me by doing exactly what I know how to do automatically, it's going to make me feel more comfortable rather
Mhm.
than sort of leaning into the emotion or leaning into the thinking of, wow, this is really hard. Like, how am I going to deal with it? Like, people want to run away from that. And I think that's just, I mean, unfortunately, that's just normal. I think it's human nature. Our brains are wired that way. And to go back to the conversation for coaches is it's the same for them, right? It's the same for them. They want to feel comfortable. They want to be in control, coaches, and they want to be able to like do what makes, what they feel is comfortable for them. They don't want to try new things. But I think what I would hypothesize, and you probably have a better sense of this than I do, the ones who are curious about what it takes to get better are typically the best coaches. Meaning, like, I want to know what I could be doing better. I want to know what I'm not doing well. I want to understand what you're Bill doing, what Mike, what you do. I want to understand from all these people who know better than me in these subject matter areas. Like, tell me what I could be doing better. Those are the coaches, the Nick Sabans of the world and the Belichicks. These guys, like, they're going out and they're trying to bring the best into their programs because they know they don't know everything. They know football, but they don't know
Mhm.
all these other things. And I think the coaches who think they know everything or don't want to know or aren't curious are the ones that are going to flatline eventually.
Yeah, I do agree. And if we haven't studied the personality types
Yeah.
of those kinds of coaches, but to your point, when I think close to home, down the road's a guy by the name of John Cook, who's the University of Nebraska women's volleyball coach. He's the winningest coach in the country since
Yep.
I think 2000 or 2005, whenever he came. But anyway, there was a period of time, and he talks about it in his book, 2013, 14 ish, where his teams were not performing to the level he thought that they should, meaning that they were getting beat in the Elite Eight instead of making it to the Final
Final
Four, right?
four, right?
But they weren't getting there. So he kind of stepped back away from his program and said, "Hey, I figured out the problem, and the problem's me." um, the girls have changed; they've evolved. Student athletes have evolved. I haven't. I still coach the exact same way I've always coached, and shame on me. So if he brings in a retired Navy SEAL and another friend of mine who's the sports psych I was telling you about, and had these guys spent like 2 years with him,
Wow.
helping him understand his gaps. He said, if I knew what they were, I'd fix them. But
Right.
I don't know. So I need to know, I need to understand where my opportunities are. Since that time, beginning in 2015, I think Husker women's volleyball has only not made the Final Four twice,
Wow.
something like that. So yeah,
Very cool.
those people, the inquisitive ones, and who are willing to say, I know I'm the problem, and I also know I'm the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, they make for great coaches.
Yeah. Well, that I I love that. Let me just say I love that, and I'm curious about John Cook. I've never heard of him. I know a little bit about women's volleyball in Nebraska, but I'm going to look into it more because I think that that's a great story. And so, as we wrap up, I think it's a great segue to what I usually ask is the last question.
Okay.
And it always is basically the same, but it comes in different forms, so everybody gets the same one. So, in your case, if you had to give one piece of advice to a coach or an AD who's out there listening about how they could best move their program forward or move their own development forward, what would that piece of advice be?
Uh, I think two things. Number one, and through the question you answered it, is everybody wants their programs to get better, right? Whether I'm a freshman baseball coach or a Division I volleyball coach, they want to grow. So number one, it starts with you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't look at your players. You can go home and you look in the mirror and say, what can I do better? Because everything from that point will trickle on. Same with you, athletic director. What can I do better? Are you coaching your coaches? Are you giving your coaches an opportunity to get better? Are you helping? Are you identifying what they're good at, what their opportunities for growth are? So I don't care what level you're at, it begins with you, number one. And then another thing on top of that, don't ever underestimate the power of trust connections. Too many coaches will tell you they love their athletes, and they do, but they don't know how to show them they do. And I use the line all the time. I can't teach a coach or an AD how to care, but I can teach you how to show you care. And so I think the second point is to then be intentional about the connections and trust you create with the people on your teams.
That's great. It's a great way to end. Bill, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast. It was great to talk to you. I'm sure we could continue this conversation on for a while, and maybe we'll have a chance to do it again in the future. But thank you so much for joining me.
Mike, thank you very much. It's been fun.
Thank you. Take care.